Hi, in this video we'll take a look at the impact of an import quota on the market for cotton, and we'll try to pay careful attention both to how to build a diagram and how to explain the stakeholder impacts using the graphic image of the diagram. So please use this video, fast forward, go back and look at whatever you want. If something's still not clear, please come in and let me know. We start by asking why put an import quota on at all. If we look at the market diagram, we're assuming free and open world trade, and we can see that the intersection between the world price and domestic supply is here at Q1, and so that means that's the amount that the domestic suppliers will be producing at that price P world. That's the intersection right there between the world price and the domestic supply curve. So that's how many domestic suppliers will be making. We can also see that over here, where the domestic demand curve, this is how much people will buy at any given price, intersects the world price. Oh, okay, they'll be wanting that much. So we can mark that out as well. And we can mark that out maybe a little bit more neatly even as Q2. So now we know that all of this distance in here will be imports, and we know that the rest of it, this distance in here, will be domestic production. So what we're going to see is an import quota in this diagram will be put into place because this has replaced most of this after we've opened up to free trade. So I'm going to back those out, and then I'm going to mark out Q2 again, just so we can keep a record, Q2. And then we're going to insert an import quota. Okay, so at this point I'll remind you that quota is a qualitative restriction on imports. So one cheat that we discussed in class is to set up some numbers here. So if I say this is, whoops, I better change, 200, and if I say this is 700, I'm going to set an import quota of importa. No, that's not right. Import quota is, I'm going to set it as 250. Why? That's halfway in between 200 and 700. So I'm going to make this nice and easy. So I suggest you do that. Drop that point right in the middle, right there, and then you can insert. Then you can set your import quota amount. That distance is 250 units. That distance is 250 units. The distance in between is 250 units. So you're taking the domestic supply and you're adding at any given price 250 units, because that's the import quota amount, because that's what we decided it was going to be. So please just remember that that distance is always 250 units. And that's why we use a cheat right in between 200 and 500. Set it halfway up. There you go. And now your supply curve is shifted over because you're looking at the domestic supply plus the amount that you let in from the world. Okay, so now we have to ask ourselves a question, and that question is, will price change? And the answer is, you're soon to see. So remember when we had a closed economy, which I didn't even bother to show you in this diagram, but when we look at a market, we look at the intersection of demand and supply and demand. Now we have the continual demand curve. At any given price, this is what domestic consumers want. Now our supply curve is this. We only allow the domestic production plus this import quota amount. So this is in effect our new supply curve. We look for the intersection, and that's right here, and that's going to be the new market price for cotton. So will price change? Yes, it will. So I'm now going to take away that little question, and I'm just going to draw out this intersection. There's going to be a price change. So now, having marked that out, we're going to see a new price, P quota and we're going to get a new quantity. I'm going to just call it Q3. Important here, we can notice also that along that supply curve, the domestic suppliers will be happier to produce more goods because the price is now here. So they will produce this many goods. So we can mark that out as well. Just mark it out with a solid line, and we can call that Q4. So now we know a number of things. We know that the domestic producer surplus used to be this, and now it is this. So that's the domestic producer surplus. We also know that the domestic consumer surplus used to be this, but it isn't anymore. Now it is simply this. Why? Consumer surplus is everything underneath the demand curve, but above the price. Oh, that's inconvenient. Let's restore that. If you remember back, you'll also remember that this used to be the imported production. When we first started looking at this, this was the revenue of the world producer because we were importing everything between Q1 and Q2. Remember then, the domestic producer was making the rest of it at the very beginning of this video. Now that has changed. Now the world producer is only making, these are the imported goods. The imports are between Q3 and Q4. But interestingly enough, the world producer is getting this price. So they're getting the P quota price. So they've kept this box of revenue, and they've also added to their revenue this box. And this can be called the windfall gain. They're getting to sell this much of the good, but they're getting this much of a price for it. So this is added to their revenue. But of course, this and this are both lost. So far, we've explained the change in producer surplus, the change in consumer surplus, and what this box is. These two other boxes, or triangles to be more accurate, are both deadweight loss, but they're deadweight loss for different reasons. This deadweight loss over here is due to the fact that consumers now can't consume Q2, they can only consume Q3 of the good, and instead of paying P world, instead of paying this lower price, they're paying a higher price here. So consumers are buying less and they're paying more for it, so that's a deadweight loss. And over here, we really have an efficiency loss. We could have world suppliers producing Q4 at P world, so we could have an intersection here. Instead, we're restricting imports and we're forcing, or we're allowing, the domestic producers to make it at a higher price. This is wasted because we could have the world producers making it at a lower price, but we're having domestic producers make it at a higher price. This is efficiency that we have wasted. Some of this producers have grabbed as their producer surplus, but this is a wasted resource. We're not letting the efficient producer make the item. That's a somewhat long-winded explanation of this diagram. For the impacts and the stakeholder effects, the ones that haven't been fully developed here, please take a look at your text or come see me.